If you stop, I'll kill you, human. The words, laced with equal parts desire and menace, send a shiver down Paul Ward's spine. Pinned against the cold metal wall of a dimly lit alien spacecraft corridor, he feels the sharp edge of a crystalline dagger pressed against his throat. The lithe, blue-skinned body of Asha, a stunningly beautiful Voxari female, presses against him, her alien warmth seeping through his diplomatic uniform. Paul's heart races, caught between fear and an unexpected surge of attraction. This wasn't how he'd envisioned the culmination of weeks of tense negotiations between humanity and the Voxari. The advanced alien race, known for their fierce warrior culture and complex mating rituals, had pushed Earth to the brink of destruction. Their fleet hovers ominously above major human cities, poised to strike if diplomacy fails. As a human diplomat chosen for his quick wit and adaptability, Paul had been tasked with brokering a peace deal and forming an alliance against a greater cosmic threat. He'd navigated the treacherous waters of Voxari politics, impressing them with his diplomatic skills and physical prowess during a series of challenges. But in doing so, he'd inadvertently triggered something far more dangerous, a Voxari mating ritual. Asha's eyes, a swirling mix of silver and violet, bore into his. "You've proven yourself worthy, human," she hisses, her breath hot on his face. "Now you must complete the ritual. If you fail, you die and your world burns." The gravity of the situation hits Paul like a plasma bolt. The success of his mission, the survival of humanity, now hinges on his ability to satisfy this alien's arousal and complete an unexpected trial. He swallows hard, feeling the dagger's edge scrape against his Adam's apple. "What do I need to do?" he asks, voice steady despite his racing pulse. Asha's lips curl into a predatory smile. She steps back, keeping the dagger trained on him as she gestures down the corridor. "Follow me to the ritual chamber. You'll face a test of endurance unlike anything your species has known. Remember, if you stop, I'll kill you myself." As they move deeper into the ship, Paul's mind races. He needs to complete this ritual, secure the Voxari alliance, and somehow prepare for whatever cosmic threat looms on the horizon. The fate of Earth rests on his shoulders, and other parts of his anatomy he'd never considered diplomatically crucial. Suddenly, alarms blare throughout the vessel. The ship's AI announces in a dispassionate tone, "Warning, unknown alien force detected, imminent attack. All personnel to battle stations." Paul freezes, looking at Asha. Her expression is a mix of fury and determination. "The ritual cannot be interrupted," she snarls, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward. "We must complete it, then face this new threat together." As they hurry towards the ritual chamber, Paul grapples with the complexity of his predicament. He must navigate the delicate balance between completing Asha's potentially fatal ritual, securing the Voxari alliance, and preparing for this new unknown danger, all while battling his own conflicting desires and the crushing weight of humanity's future. The corridor ahead splits into two paths. Asha pulls him towards the left, towards what he assumes is the ritual chamber. The right path leads to the bridge, where he might gather more information about the impending attack. Paul has seconds to decide. Follow Asha and potentially save Earth through this bizarre ritual, or break away and risk everything to face the new threat head-on. Time slows as he makes his choice, knowing that either path could lead to humanity's salvation or its ultimate destruction. Paul's hand tightened around Asha's wrist, his decision made in a heartbeat. "The ritual chamber," he said firmly, allowing her to guide him down the left corridor. The ship shuddered again, nearly throwing them off balance as they ran. "We must hurry," Asha hissed, her crystalline dagger still gripped tightly in her free hand. "The ritual cannot wait, even with this new threat." They burst through an ornate doorway into a vast circular chamber. Paul's eyes widened as he took in the array of alien devices and obstacles scattered throughout the room. Glowing orbs pulsed with an eerie light, casting long shadows across the metallic floor. Asha turned to face him, her silver-violet eyes blazing with intensity. "The test of endurance begins now, human. We must navigate these challenges while maintaining physical contact at all times. If we separate, even for a moment, you fail, and the consequences will be dire." Paul nodded, his throat dry. "I understand. What's our first move? Before Asha could respond, the ship rocked violently. The artificial gravity fluctuated, causing them both to stumble. Paul instinctively reached out, steadying Asha against his chest. She looked up at him, surprise evident in her alien features. "Impressive reflexes," she murmured. "You'll need them. The damage to the ship will make this even more challenging." They began to move through the chamber, their bodies pressed close as they approached the first obstacle, a complex, maze-like structure that towered above them. Paul felt Asha's warmth against him, her alien scent filling his nostrils. He pushed aside the distracting thoughts, focusing on the task at hand. "We must communicate through touch," Asha explained as they entered the maze. "A wrong turn could cost us dearly." Paul nodded, allowing his military training to take over. He assessed their surroundings, noting potential paths and dead ends. With careful, deliberate movements, he guided Asha through the twisting corridors. Their bodies moved in sync, a dance of subtle shifts and pressures that conveyed directions and warnings. Halfway through the maze, a flickering hologram materialized before them. Paul recognized the stern visage of Admiral Zorn, the Voxari fleet commander. "Asha," the admiral barked, "we've identified the attackers. It's the Krell-Thax. Abort the ritual and report for battle stations immediately." Paul felt Asha stiffen against him. Her eyes darted between the hologram and Paul's face, conflict evident in her expression. In that moment, Paul knew he had to act. "Admiral," he said, stepping forward while maintaining contact with Asha. "With all due respect, completing this ritual is crucial. The Human-Voxari alliance could be the key to defeating the Krell-Thax. We need to finish what we've started." Asha's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and admiration crossing her features. Admiral Zorn scowled, but after a tense moment, he nodded curtly. "Very well. But make it quick. We need every warrior we can muster." The hologram flickered out. "You continue to surprise me, human," Asha said as they resumed their journey through the maze. "Your strategic mind is impressive." They emerged from the maze only to face a new challenge, a series of narrow beams suspended over crackling energy fields. Paul eyed the obstacle warily, noting how the ship's unstable gravity made the beams sway unpredictably. "We cross together," Asha instructed. "Perfect balance and coordination are essential." They stepped onto the first beam, their bodies intertwined for stability. Paul's muscles tensed as he adjusted to Asha's movements, finding a rhythm that kept them both steady. As they progressed, he found himself marveling at the complexity of Voxari physiology, the subtle shifts in Asha's balance, the way her skin seemed to adapt to his touch. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. A section of the ceiling came loose, hurtling towards them. Without thinking, Paul spun, shielding Asha with his body. The debris glanced off his shoulder, sending a jolt of pain through him, but they remained on the beam. Asha gasped, her skin beginning to emit a soft, pulsating glow. You saved me," she breathed, her voice filled with wonder. "Just returning the favor," Paul grunted, fighting through the pain as they continued across the beams. "You did say you'd kill me if I failed after all." A small smile played at the corners of Asha's mouth. "Perhaps I misjudged you, human. There may be more to your species than we realized." As they reached the final stretch of the ritual chamber, the ship's AI blared another warning. "Alert! Krell-Thax forces have breached outer defenses. Boarding parties detected." Paul and Asha exchanged a look of dogged commitment. "The final test," Asha said, pulling Paul towards the center of the chamber. "A dance of synchronization. Our bodies must move as one, perfectly attuned to each other." They began the intricate series of movements, their bodies flowing together in ways that sent jolts of electricity through Paul's nervous system. The sexual tension that had been building throughout the ritual reached a fever pitch as they twisted and turned, limbs entangled in increasingly intimate positions. Paul struggled to maintain focus, acutely aware of every point of contact between their bodies. Asha's bioluminescent glow intensified, bathing them both in a soft, ethereal light. Just as they neared the final steps of the dance, the chamber door exploded inward. Krell-Thax warriors poured into the room, their reptilian features contorted in snarls of rage. Paul and Asha froze, caught in a compromising embrace as the alien invaders leveled their weapons at them. In that moment, with the fate of two species hanging in the balance, Paul realized that the true test was only just beginning. The tension in the ritual chamber reached a fever pitch as Paul and Asha stood frozen, their bodies still entwined in the final pose of their synchronization dance. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still as they locked eyes with the invading Krelthax warriors. Then chaos erupted. Paul's diplomatic instincts warred with his survival impulses as he quickly assessed the situation. In one fluid motion, he broke away from Asha, shattering their ritual connection. He lunged for a nearby energy staff mounted on the wall, tossing it to Asha with a shout. "Catch!" Asha snatched the staff out of the air, her eyes widening in surprise at Paul's quick thinking. Without missing a beat, Paul grabbed a ceremonial blade from a display, its weight unfamiliar but reassuring in his grip. The leader of the Krelthax, a towering reptilian figure with iridescent scales, stepped forward. His forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air as he surveyed the scene. "Surrender the ship immediately," he hissed, his voice a guttural rasp. Paul's mind raced, searching for a way to buy time. He stepped forward, blade held low in a non-threatening posture. "I am Paul Ward, diplomatic envoy of Earth," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "May I ask who addresses us and what brings you to this Voxari vessel?" The Krelthax leader's eyes narrowed, vertical pupils contracting to thin slits. "I am Grok, commander of the Krelthax invasion force. Your stalling tactics are futile, human." As Paul engaged Grok, he noticed Asha subtly activating a hidden panel on her energy staff. A soft pulse of light confirmed the activation of an emergency beacon. Paul redoubled his efforts to keep the Krelthax distracted. "Invasion force?" Paul questioned, feigning ignorance. "Surely there must be some misunderstanding. The Voxari and humans are on the brink of forming a powerful alliance. Any aggressive action against either of our species would be unwise." Grok's lipless mouth curled into a snarl, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Your alliance means nothing to us. The Krelthax will—" His words were cut short as the chamber doors burst open once more. A squad of Voxari warriors poured in, led by a broad-shouldered male with intricate facial markings. "Commander Zax," Asha breathed, relief evident in her voice. The room exploded into action. Energy bolts crisscrossed the air as Voxari and Krelthax exchanged fire. Paul ducked behind a ritual altar, pulling Asha down with him. The failed mating ritual was forgotten as they found themselves thrust into battle. Paul's military training kicked in as he assessed the situation. The Voxari energy weapons were keeping the Krelthax at bay, but the invaders' thick scales provided significant protection. Close quarters combat would be necessary to turn the tide. With a nod to Asha, Paul vaulted over the altar. He charged the nearest Krelthax, using his smaller size and agility to his advantage. The alien's claws raked the air where Paul's head had been a moment before. Paul ducked under the attack, bringing his ceremonial blade up in a swift arc. The keen edge bit into the softer scales at the Krelthax's joint, eliciting a howl of pain. As the wounded Krelthax stumbled, Paul wrenched the alien's weapon from its grasp. The unfamiliar design took him a moment to decipher, but he quickly located the firing mechanism. He spun, unleashing a barrage of energy bolts at another approaching invader. Across the room, Asha moved with lethal grace. Her energy staff hummed as she twirled it, creating a defensive barrier of light. Two Krelthax rushed her simultaneously. Asha dropped low, sweeping the staff in a wide arc that caught both attackers in the legs. As they fell, she brought the staff's end down with crushing force, incapacitating them in rapid succession. Paul found himself back-to-back with Asha, their bodies once again in sync as they fended off the Krelthax assault. Despite the chaos of battle, Paul couldn't help but marvel at how naturally they moved together. The connection they had forged during the ritual, though interrupted, seemed to linger. As the last Krelthax in the chamber fell, Commander Zax approached Paul and Asha. His expression was grim. The ship's AI reports Krelthax boarding pods attaching to multiple sections of the vessel. We must reach the bridge to coordinate our defense. Paul nodded, mind already racing through potential strategies. The main corridors will be overrun. Is there another way to the bridge? Asha's eyes lit up. The maintenance tunnels, They run throughout the ship. We could bypass the enemy forces. Commander Zax considered for a moment, then nodded. A sound plan. Krell, Nara, he called to two nearby Voxari warriors. You'll accompany them. The rest of us will hold this position and slow the Krellthax advance. As they prepared to enter the maintenance access point, Paul caught Asha's eye. The intensity of her gaze sent a shiver down his spine, reminding him of the intimate moment they had shared before the interruption. There was no time to dwell on it now, but the undriven tension between them added another layer of complexity to their already dire situation. With a final nod to Commander Zax, Paul followed Asha into the narrow opening of the maintenance tunnel. The fate of two worlds now rested on their ability to reach the bridge and repel the Krellthax invasion. As the access panel slid shut behind them, plunging the group into dim, blue-tinged emergency lighting, Paul steeled himself for the challenges ahead. The battle for the ship, and perhaps the future of human-Voxari relations, had only just begun. As they crawled through the dimly lit maintenance tunnels, Paul's mind raced with possibilities and strategies. The narrow space amplified every sound, from their labored breathing to the distant rumble of battle echoing through the ship's structure. Asha led the way, her bioluminescent skin providing a soft glow that illuminated the path ahead. Krell and Nara brought up the rear, their energy weapons at the ready. The group moved swiftly but cautiously, aware that any wrong turn could lead them straight into enemy hands. After what felt like hours of navigating the labyrinthine passages, Asha held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. She gestured to a panel on the wall, her voice barely above a whisper. We're near the bridge access point. Once we exit, we'll likely encounter resistance. Paul nodded, his body tense with anticipation. He glanced at the Voxari warriors behind him, noting their steadfast perseverance. Remember, he said softly, our priority is reaching the bridge. Engage only when necessary. With a nod from Asha, Paul helped her pry open the access panel. They emerged into a corridor bathed in red emergency lighting, the ship's alarms a distant wail. As they rounded the final corner to the bridge entrance, they came face to face with a group of Krellthax guards. For a heartbeat, both sides froze in surprise. Then chaos erupted. Paul's combat training kicked in as he ducked under a swipe from a Krellthax warrior. He countered with a swift uppercut, his fist connecting with the alien's softer underbelly scales. The Krellthax doubled over, giving Paul the opening he needed to disarm and incapacitate his opponent. Beside him, Asha moved with fluid grace, her energy staff a blur of motion. She parried a blow from one Krellthax, using the staff's momentum to sweep another off its feet. Krell and Nara fought back to back, their synchronized movements speaking to years of combat experience. As Paul grappled with another Krellthax, he caught sight of a warrior sneaking up behind Asha. Without hesitation, he broke free from his current engagement and lunged towards her. Asha, behind you! Paul tackled the Krellthax just as it was about to strike, both of them crashing to the floor. They rolled, trading blows, until Paul managed to pin the alien down. With a well-placed strike to a nerve cluster he'd observed during their earlier encounter, he rendered the Krellthax unconscious. Breathing heavily, Paul looked up to see Asha staring at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and something deeper. She extended a hand, helping him to his feet. That's twice you've saved me now, Paul Ward, she said, her voice carrying a note of warmth he hadn't heard before. Their moment was cut short as Krill called out, "The bridge! We must hurry!" The team rushed to the bridge entrance, stepping over the fallen Krellthax guards. Paul and Asha took point, with Krell and Nara providing cover. With a nod to each other, they breached the bridge. The scene that greeted them was one of tense standoff. Admiral Zorn and his crew stood with weapons drawn, facing off against Grok and a group of Krellthax who had taken control of the main console. The air crackled with tension, both sides one wrong move away from open conflict. Paul stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Hold your fire," he called out, his voice cutting through the tension. All eyes turned to him, a mix of surprise and wariness on both Voxari and Krellthax faces. Grok's reptilian features contorted in a snarl. "You again, human? Have you come to surrender?" Paul met the Krellthax leader's gaze steadily. "I've come to talk, Grok. There's more at stake here than you realize. Grok's eyes narrowed, but curiosity seemed to get the better of him. Speak quickly, human. My patience wears thin. Taking a deep breath, Paul began to lay out the information about the larger Krelthax invasion force. He watched as Grok's expression shifted from dismissive to shocked, then to anger. Impossible, Grok hissed. Our leaders would not keep such plans from us. We are here to claim new territories, not to what, Grok? Paul pressed. Not to exterminate entire species? Not to destroy worlds? Because that's what your leaders have planned. As Paul spoke, he noticed Asha moving discreetly towards a secondary console. He kept his focus on Grok, drawing the Krelthax leader into a heated debate about the ethics of their invasion. Suddenly, the ship's systems came to life, displays flickering as control was wrested from the Krelthax. Admiral Zorn wasted no time, immediately opening a channel to the Voxari fleet. Grok roared in anger, but found himself and his team surrounded by Voxari warriors, their weapons charged and ready. The Krelthax leader's gaze darted between Paul and Admiral Zorn, realizing he had been outmaneuvered. Paul stepped closer to Grok, his voice low and urgent. It doesn't have to end in more bloodshed, Grok. You and your team have been used as pawns in a larger game, but we have a chance here to change the course of this conflict. As Paul outlined his proposal for a three-way alliance, he could see the wheels turning in Grok's mind. The Krelthax leader's initial disbelief gave way to consideration, then to a grudging respect for the human's audacity. Their discussion was interrupted by a blaring alarm from the ship's sensors. Admiral Zorn's face paled as he interpreted the readings. By the cosmic void, he breathed. The Krelthax mothership. It's charging a weapon of unimaginable power. If it fires, entire planets will be obliterated. The bridge erupted into frantic activity as the newly formed alliance grappled with this existential threat. Paul's mind raced, considering and discarding plans until a dangerous idea took shape. He turned to Asha, seeing his own grit mirrored in her eyes. We need to stop that weapon, he said, his voice low and intense, and I think I know how. As Paul outlined his plan to infiltrate the Krelthax mothership, he watched Admiral Zorn and Grok exchange looks of grudging agreement. The fate of their respective species hung in the balance, and this audacious plan might be their only hope. With the details hammered out and support secured from both Voxari and Krelthax forces, Paul and Asha found themselves with a rare moment alone as they prepared for their mission. The weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily upon them. But there was something else too, an electric tension that had been building since their interrupted ritual. Asha stepped closer to Paul, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with an intensity he hadn't seen before. Paul, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I've never met anyone like you, human or Voxari. Paul felt his heart race as he gazed into Asha's otherworldly eyes. Without a word, he cupped her face in his hands and pulled her into a deep, passionate kiss. The universe seemed to fall away as they lost themselves in the moment, their bodies pressed together in an echo of their earlier intimacy. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Paul rested his forehead against Asha's, savoring their closeness. Whatever happens out there, he murmured, I'm glad we're facing it together. With one last lingering look, they made their way to the shuttle bay. As they boarded the sleek Voxari craft that would carry them into the heart of danger, Paul felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. The fate of two worlds, and now the promise of a future with Asha, rested on the success of their mission. The shuttle's engines hummed to life as Paul and Asha strapped themselves in. Through the view screen, the massive form of the Krelthax mothership loomed, its weapon systems glowing with ominous energy. As they launched into space, Paul's grip tightened on the controls. The real test, he knew, was only just beginning. As they approached the massive Krelthax mothership, Paul's eyes widened at the sight of the behemoth vessel. Its dark, angular form blotted out the stars, dwarfing their Voxari shuttle. Asha, look at this, Paul said, gesturing to the sensor readouts. There's some kind of field surrounding the ship. Asha leaned in, her bioluminescent skin casting a soft glow over the console. By the cosmic void, she breathed. It's a nanobot barrier. Those things will tear our shuttle apart if we try to pass through. Paul's mind raced, analyzing the data scrolling across the screen. He noticed a slight fluctuation in the nanobot concentration. There, he pointed. The field's weaker in that section. If we overload our shields and project them outward, we might be able to push the nanobots aside long enough to slip through. Asha's eyes met his, a mixture of admiration and concern in her gaze. It's risky, but it might be our only shot. Let's do it. Paul's hands flew over the controls, rerouting power to the shields. The shuttle shuddered as its systems strained under the pressure. Warning alarms blared as they approached the nanobot field. "Shields at maximum," Paul announced, his voice tense. "Brace yourself." The shuttle plunged into the swarm of microscopic machines. For a moment, it seemed as if they would make it through unscathed. Then the shield generator began to overheat, its pitch rising to a dangerous whine. "We're losing power," Asha shouted over the din of alarms. Paul made a split-second decision. Rerouting power from life support. The shuttle lurched forward, pushing through the last of the nanobot field. They emerged on the other side, but at a cost. Sparks flew from the control panel as systems failed one by one. "We're dead in the water," Paul said, unbuckling his harness. "We need to abandon ship." They donned their spacesuits and magnetic boots, then depressurized the cabin. As the airlock opened, Paul took one last look at the shuttle that had carried them this far. Then, with a nod to Asha, he launched himself towards the hulking form of the Krellthax mothership. The journey across the ship's exterior was treacherous. Automated defense turrets swiveled towards them, forcing Paul and Asha to duck and weave between the massive hull plates. Conduits of exotic energy pulsed beneath their feet, threatening to overload their suit systems if they strayed too close. "There!" Asha called out, pointing to a small hatch. "An auxiliary airlock." They made their way to the airlock, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy blasts from a nearby turret. Paul examined the control panel, his fingers dancing over the alien interface. "Can you crack it?" Asha asked, keeping watch for more defenses. Paul nodded, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead, inside his helmet. "Just about... got it." The airlock hissed open, and they tumbled inside. As it cycled, repressurizing, they removed their helmets and took their first breath of recycled Krellthax air. The inner door slid open, revealing a vast hangar filled with rows of sleek Krellthax fighter craft. Paul and Asha crouched behind a stack of supply crates, observing the activity around them. Nearby, a group of Krellthax technicians huddled around a holographic display, their scaled hides glistening under the harsh hangar lights. "The World Eater is nearly operational," one of them hissed. "Once the dark matter core stabilizes, we'll be able to obliterate entire planets with a single shot." Paul and Asha exchanged grim looks. The stakes of their mission had just become painfully clear. They made their way deeper into the ship, ducking into maintenance shafts and crawling through ventilation ducts to avoid detection. The close quarters brought them into frequent contact, their bodies pressing together in the narrow passages. Despite the danger, Paul found himself acutely aware of Asha's presence, the heat of her body, the soft glow of her skin. As they emerged from a particularly tight duct, they found themselves in a dimly lit corridor. Ahead, a door hissed open, revealing a sight that made their blood run cold. Inside was a biolab filled with transparent chambers, containing Voxari and human subjects. Scientists moved between the tanks, taking readings and adjusting equipment. Asha's fists clenched at her sides. "We have to stop this," she whispered, her voice tight with anger. Paul nodded, his heart made. "We will. But first, we need to take out that weapon." They continued on, following the ship's power conduits towards the heart of the vessel. As they neared the central control room, the security presence increased. Elite Krellthax warriors in advanced battlesuits patrolled the corridors, forcing Paul and Asha to take ever more circuitous routes. Finally, they reached a junction near the control room. Through a reinforced viewport, they could see the massive World Eater weapon, its dark matter core pulsing with ominous energy. "We'll never get past those guards," Asha said, eyeing the heavily armed Krellthax at the entrance. Paul's gaze fell on a nearby communications panel. "Maybe we don't have to. If we can access the ship's internal comms, we might be able to create a diversion." Asha nodded towards an auxiliary terminal across the corridor. And if I can get to that terminal, I might be able to access the weapon controls directly. As they prepared to put their plan into action, a klaxon began to blare. The ship's AI announced, "Alert! Human Voxari fleet detected. Prepare World Eater for immediate deployment." Paul's heart raced. They were out of time. He turned to Asha, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared fear and commitment. Without thinking, he pulled her close and kissed her deeply, pouring all his feelings into that one desperate act. When they parted, both were breathless. Asha's skin pulsed with a brilliant glow, her eyes shining with renewed purpose. "Let's finish this," she said. With a final nod, they split up. Paul made his way to the communications panel, while Asha crept towards the auxiliary terminal. As Paul's fingers flew over the alien controls, preparing to unleash chaos in the Krelthax systems, he allowed himself a moment of hope. Whatever happened next, he knew that he and Asha, together, had a chance to change the course of this war and save countless lives. The ship hummed around them, the World Eater's power building to catastrophic levels. Paul took a deep breath and initiated the hack. It was time to turn the tide of this war and save countless lives. The ship hummed around them, the World Eater's power building to catastrophic levels. Paul took a deep breath and initiated the hack. It was time to turn the tables on the Krelthax. His fingers flew across the alien console, bypassing security protocols and delving deep into the ship's communication systems. With a final command, he triggered a false alarm, his heart pounding as he waited to see if the ruse would work. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. A computerized voice echoed through the corridors. "Alert! Critical reactor breach detected in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately." The effect was instantaneous. Krelthax guards stationed near the weapon control room began to move, their scaled forms disappearing down the hallway as they rushed to respond to the non-existent threat. Paul caught Asha's eye and nodded. She slipped from their hiding spot and made her way to the auxiliary terminal, her bioluminescent skin dimmed to avoid detection. Paul watched in awe as her fingers danced across the alien interface, lines of code reflecting in her determined eyes. "I'm in," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant alarms. "But Paul, this is worse than we thought. The weapon's already powering up. We can't just shut it down. It could trigger a meltdown that would destroy everything in this sector of space." Paul's mind raced, analyzing their options. His eyes fell on a schematic of the ship's power distribution. "The propulsion systems," he said, moving closer to Asha. "If we redirect the energy there, it might overload them. We could cripple the ship without risking a catastrophic explosion." Asha's eyes widened as she considered the plan. "It's risky, but it might work. Cover me while I reroute the power conduits." Paul nodded, hefting the stolen Krelthax energy rifle he'd acquired during their infiltration. He took up a position near the entrance, every muscle tense as he scanned for threats. The minutes ticked by, filled with the soft sounds of Asha's work and the distant wail of alarms. Paul's grip on the rifle tightened as he heard approaching footsteps. A pair of Krelthax guards rounded the corner, their eyes widening as they spotted the intruders. Paul didn't hesitate. He squeezed the trigger, sending bolts of crackling energy towards the guards. One went down immediately, but the other returned fire, forcing Paul to dive for cover. "How much longer?" he called to Asha, risking a glance over his makeshift barricade. "Almost there," she replied, her voice strained with concentration. "Just need to... out." Her words were cut off as the ship's AI announced, "Security breach detected. Activating automated defense systems." Panels in the walls slid open, revealing sleek, deadly turrets. They swiveled towards Paul and Asha, their barrels glowing with building energy. "Get down!" Paul shouted, launching himself towards Asha. He tackled her to the ground as energy bolts sizzled through the air where she had been standing moments before. They scrambled for cover behind a bank of computers, the acrid smell of ozone filling the air as the turrets continued their assault. Paul returned fire, managing to take out one of the automated weapons. "Keep working," he told Asha, his voice tight with urgency. "I'll hold them off." Asha nodded, her skin pulsing with a mix of fear and purpose as she resumed her work on the terminal. Paul provided covering fire, his stolen rifle growing hot in his hands as he fended off the relentless attacks. Just as it seemed they might succeed, a new threat emerged. The doors to the control room hissed open, revealing a tall, imposing Krelthax. Unlike the guards, this one wore an elaborate lab coat adorned with strange devices. "Dr. Zenthor," Asha breathed, recognition and fear in her voice. The Krelthax scientist's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. With surprising speed for his size, he lunged towards the main control panel. Paul reacted instinctively, dropping his rifle and intercepting the scientist. They grappled, Paul's human agility matching the Krelthax's superior strength. They crashed into consoles and equipment, alarms blaring around them as systems registered the impact. Through the chaos, Paul saw Zenthor's clawed hand reaching for a specific control. With a burst of desperate strength, Paul managed to slam the scientist's arm away. There was a sickening crack, and Zenthor roared in pain. But even as he fell, the Krelthax scientist's other hand shot out, activating a sequence on the nearest panel. "You're too late," he hissed, his reptilian eyes filled with malice. "The World Eater cannot be stopped now." Paul turned to Asha, seeing the horror on her face as new warnings flashed across her screen. "He's activated a failsafe," she said, her fingers flying as she tried to counter the new threat. "The weapon's charging sequence is accelerating. We're out of time." Paul's mind raced, searching for a solution. He saw the perseverance in Asha's eyes harden into willpower. "I have an idea," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "But it's dangerous. I can create a feedback loop in the weapon's power systems. It'll generate a massive electromagnetic pulse, enough to disable the entire ship." "Do it," Paul said without hesitation. Asha nodded, her hands a blur over the controls. As she worked, Paul became acutely aware of their situation, the heat of battle, the closeness of their bodies, the very real possibility that these might be their final moments together. He reached out, placing a hand on Asha's shoulder. She paused, looking up at him. In that moment, no words were needed. Their eyes met, conveying everything they felt: fear, hope, and a connection that transcended their different species. Asha's skin pulsed with a brilliant glow as she returned to her work. "It's done," she announced as a new alarm began to sound. "The EMP is building. We have seconds before it detonates." Paul's eyes darted around the room, searching for any means of escape. His gaze fell on a small hatch near the far wall. "There!" he shouted, grabbing Asha's hand. "An escape pod!" They raced across the room, energy bolts from the remaining turrets sizzling past them. Paul slammed his hand on the release panel, and the hatch slid open. Without hesitation, he pushed Asha inside and followed, sealing the pod behind them. "Brace yourself!" he yelled as he activated the launch sequence. The pod shuddered, then shot out of the mothership just as a wave of electromagnetic energy erupted from its core. The pulse washed over them, momentarily shorting out the pod's systems before its shielding kicked in. Through the small viewport, Paul and Asha watched in awe as the massive Krelthax ship went dark, its weapon powering down as the EMP ravaged its systems. Around them, debris from the space battle drifted silently. Inside the cramped confines of the escape pod, Paul and Asha found themselves pressed together, their breath mingling as the adrenaline of their narrow escape began to fade. The intimacy of their position, combined with the intensity of their shared ordeal, created an electric tension between them. Paul's eyes met Asha's, seeing his own mix of relief, exhaustion, and something more reflected there. Without conscious thought, he leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a passionate kiss. Asha responded eagerly, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with a soft, warm glow. As they parted, both slightly breathless, a small smile played on Asha's lips. "We did it," she whispered. Before Paul could respond, a sharp beep from the pod's control panel drew their attention. The emergency beacon had activated, broadcasting their location to any ships in the vicinity. "Let's hope it's our allies who find us first," Paul said, his arms still wrapped around Asha as they peered out at the star-filled void. As they waited for rescue, Paul's mind turned to the future. They had prevented a catastrophe and possibly turned the tide of the war, but he knew their struggles were nowhere near the end. The complex politics of their new alliance, the remaining Krelthax forces, and the uncharted territory of his relationship with Asha all lay ahead. For now, though, as they drifted amidst the aftermath of the battle, Paul allowed himself a moment of peace. Whatever challenges awaited them, he knew that together they could face anything the universe threw their way. Paul and Asha's eyes remained fixed on the star-filled void beyond the escape pod's viewport. The gentle hum of the pod's systems and their synchronized breathing were the only sounds breaking the silence of space. A sharp beep pierced the quiet, causing them both to jump. The pod's control panel flashed with an urgent message. Emergency beacon activated, broadcasting distress signal. Paul's arm tightened around Asha. Well, I guess our quiet moment is over, he said, a wry smile on his face. Asha's skin pulsed with a mix of concern and anticipation. Let's hope it's our allies who find us first, she replied, echoing Paul's earlier sentiment. They scanned the debris field surrounding them, alert for any sign of movement. Twisted metal from destroyed ships drifted by, a somber reminder of the battle they had narrowly escaped. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, a sleek ship emerged from behind a large piece of wreckage. Its smooth, organic lines and soft blue glow identified it as Voxari in origin. Looks like we're in luck, Paul said, relief evident in his voice. The ship approached cautiously, its tractor beam engaging to draw the escape pod closer. As they neared the larger vessel, Paul and Asha could make out its name etched in flowing Voxari script. Starlight Seeker. A hatch on the Voxari ship's hull irised open, and the escape pod was gently pulled inside. As the airlock cycled, Paul and Asha exchanged a look, steeling themselves for whatever reception awaited them. The pod's hatch slid open with a hiss, revealing a team of Voxari in sleek environmental suits, their weapons trained on the opening. The lead figure, her helmet visor transparent, blinked in surprise at the sight of a human, and Voxari emerging from a Krelthax escape pod. Identify yourselves, she commanded, her voice firm but not hostile. Paul raised his hand slowly. I'm Lieutenant Paul Chen, Earth Defense Force. This is Asha Vex, Voxari Special Operations. The leader's eyes narrowed. Prove it. Asha stepped forward, her skin pulsing with a complex pattern of light. The Voxari team visibly relaxed, lowering their weapons. My apologies, the leader said, removing her helmet to reveal delicate features framed by iridescent hair. I'm Captain Lyra of the Starlight Seeker. We didn't expect to find allies in Krelthax equipment. Paul nodded. It's a long story, Captain. One I think your superiors will be very interested in hearing. Captain Lyra gestured for them to follow. Let's get you to medical first. Standard procedure after a rescue, especially given your unusual circumstances. As they walked through the ship's curved corridors, Paul marveled at the organic design of Voxari technology. Living metal pulsed with energy, and holographic displays flickered to life as they passed. The medical bay was a circular room dominated by a central examination platform. A Voxari with bright green markings approached them, his movements quick and precise. I'm Dr. Zalos, he introduced himself, gesturing for Paul and Asha to take a seat on the platform. Let's see what you've been through, shall we? As Dr. Zalos ran his scans, his expression grew increasingly concerned. He tapped rapidly on a holographic interface, muttering to himself in Voxari. Is something wrong? Asha asked, her skin flickering with anxiety. Dr. Zalos looked up, his large eyes blinking rapidly. You've both been exposed to dark matter radiation, likely from the Krelthax weapon you encountered. Paul felt a chill run down his spine. How bad is it? Not immediately life-threatening, Dr. Zalos assured them, but it's causing some interesting physiological changes. He turned to Paul. Your neural pathways have been enhanced. Your cognitive abilities and reaction times are likely to be significantly increased. Paul flexed his fingers, suddenly aware of a newfound clarity in his thoughts and movements. Dr. Zalos then addressed Asha. As for you, the radiation has intensified your natural bioluminescence. Your light patterns seem to be responding more strongly to your emotional state. Asha looked down at her arms, noticing the intricate swirls of light dancing across her skin. These changes are fascinating, Dr. Zalos continued, but they also present potential long-term health risks. I'll need to monitor you both closely. Before they could discuss further, Captain Lyra entered the medical bay. I've just received word from Admiral Zorn, she announced. We're to rendezvous with the flagship immediately. They're eager to debrief you on your mission. As the Starlight Seeker changed course, Paul and Asha found themselves in the ship's briefing room, recounting their harrowing experience to Captain Lyra and her senior officers. The Voxari listened intently, their expressions a mix of awe and concern, as Paul and Asha described the World Eater and their narrow escape. The implications of this are enormous, Captain Lyra said as they concluded their report. The admirals will want to hear every detail. The journey to the flagship passed quickly, filled with medical checkups and strategy discussions. As they approached the massive vessel that served as the combined fleet's command center, Paul felt a mix of anticipation and dread. He knew the information they carried would change the course of the war, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their trials were nowhere near the end. The Starlight Seeker docked smoothly with the flagship, and Paul and Asha were quickly ushered to the main conference room. As the doors slid open, they found themselves face-to-face with the leaders of the Human Voxari Alliance and an unexpected familiar face. Admiral Zorn, a tall Voxari with deep blue markings, nodded in greeting. Beside him stood Admiral Chen, Paul's stern-faced superior officer. But it was the third figure that caught Paul off guard. Grok, the Krelthax defector, his reptilian features set in a grim expression. "Welcome back, Lieutenant Chen, Operative Vex," Admiral Zorn said, his voice resonating with authority. "I believe you have quite the report for us." As Paul opened his mouth to speak, a sudden searing pain lanced through his head. He stumbled, gripping the edge of the conference table for support. Beside him, Asha's skin flared with a brilliant pulsating light. "Paul!" Asha cried out, reaching for him, as the room erupted into concerned murmurs. Through the haze of pain, Paul heard Admiral Chen calling for a medical team. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, his last thought was of Asha, her luminous form the only beacon in a sea of encroaching shadows. Shadows. Paul's eyes fluttered open, the searing pain in his head subsiding to a dull throb. He found himself in the medical bay of the flagship, surrounded by concerned faces. Asha lay on the adjacent bed, her skin pulsing with an otherworldly glow. "What happened?" Paul croaked, his throat dry. Dr. Zelos stepped forward, his green markings luminescent under the harsh medical lights. "The dark matter radiation is causing unexpected physiological changes. We need to monitor you both closely." Before Paul could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Admiral Zorn's voice echoed over the intercom. "All hands to battle stations. Krelthax Armada approaching." Despite protest from the medical staff, Paul pushed himself off the bed. Asha did the same, her movements mirroring his with uncanny precision. They shared a look of commitment and made their way to the bridge. The scene that greeted them was one of controlled chaos. Officers rushed between stations, relaying information and preparing for the impending battle. Through the view screen, Paul could see the vast expanse of space dotted with Allied ships, taking up defensive positions around key planets. Admiral Zorn turned as they entered, his expression grave. "Lieutenant Chen, Operative Vex, I hope you're fit for duty. We're severely outnumbered." Paul's enhanced cognitive abilities kicked in, his mind racing through tactical possibilities faster than ever before. He studied the holographic display of the approaching Krelthax fleet, noticing patterns and weaknesses that would have eluded him just days ago. "Sir," Paul said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him, "I have an idea. We can use the disabled Krelthax mothership as a Trojan horse." Admiral Zorn's eyes narrowed. "Explain." As Paul outlined his plan, Asha's skin pulsed with increasing intensity, her bioluminescence responding to the mounting tension in the room. When he finished, a heavy silence fell over the bridge. "It's risky," Admiral Chen said, breaking the silence, "but it might be our only chance." Admiral Zorn nodded. "Assemble a team. You leave immediately." Paul and Asha volunteered without hesitation, ignoring the concerned glances from those around them. As they prepared to depart, Dr. Zelos approached with two sleek, form-fitting suits. These will help contain and regulate the dark matter energy, he explained, helping them into the suits. They'll also mask your life signs from Krelthak's sensors. Suited up and armed, Paul and Asha led their small team to the hangar bay. As they boarded the shuttle that would take them to the disabled mothership, Paul felt a surge of emotions from Asha. Without a word, he reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining. The journey to the mothership was tense and silent. As they docked and made their way to the bridge, Paul couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the maw of a sleeping beast. Once on the bridge, they worked quickly to reactivate the ship's systems. Asha's fingers flew over the alien controls, her enhanced abilities allowing her to interface with the Krelthak's technology at an astonishing rate. "Communications online," she announced, her voice tight with concentration. "Broadcasting false credentials now." Paul held his breath as they approached the Krelthak's armada. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought they'd been discovered. Then, miraculously, the enemy ships parted, allowing them to penetrate deep into the heart of the fleet. Their relief was short-lived. As they neared the enemy flagship, alarms blared throughout the mothership. They'd been discovered. "Krelthak's boarding parties detected," one of their team members shouted. "Multiple locations." Paul and Asha shared a look, both knowing what needed to be done. They moved in perfect synchronization, taking up defensive positions as the first wave of Krelthak's warriors teleported onto the bridge. The battle that ensued was like nothing Paul had ever experienced. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to dodge energy blasts that would have otherwise vaporized him. He moved with preternatural speed, his movements fluid and precise as he engaged the Krelthaks in close combat. Beside him, Asha was a vision of deadly grace. Her intensified bioluminescence pulsed with blinding flashes, disorienting the enemy and giving her team crucial moments of advantage. Together, they fought back to back, their movements so perfectly coordinated, it was as if they shared a single mind. As they fought, Paul noticed something strange. Whenever he or Asha came into close contact with Krelthak's technology, it seemed to malfunction. Weapons misfired, shields flickered, and communication devices emitted ear-piercing shrieks. An idea began to form in Paul's mind, a high-stakes endeavor that could turn the tide of not just this battle, but the entire war. He caught Asha's eye, and in that moment of connection, he knew she understood. "We need to overload our containment suits," he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos of battle. "Create a massive dark matter pulse. It could disable their entire fleet." Asha's skin pulsed with a complex pattern of light, conveying her understanding and her fear. They both knew the cost of such an action. Their bodies, already pushed to the limit by the dark matter exposure, might not survive the surge. As if sensing the gravity of the moment, the battle around them seemed to pause. In that brief respite, Paul pulled Asha close, their foreheads touching as they shared what might be their final embrace. "Together," he whispered. Asha's response was a burst of luminescence that conveyed more than words ever could. As one, they reached for the controls of their containment suits, prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of both their worlds. Just as their fingers hovered over the fatal command, a voice rang out across the bridge. "Wait!" Paul and Asha turned, weapons raised, to see a Krelthak scientist standing before them, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I am Zixara," she said, her reptilian features set in a determined expression. "And I believe I can help you save your worlds without sacrificing yourselves." As Krelthak's reinforcements pounded on the sealed bridge doors, Paul and Asha faced a crucial decision that would determine the fate of the battle, the war, and their own lives. Lives. Paul's mind raced, weighing the potential consequences of trusting this unexpected ally against the imminent threat of the Krelthak's reinforcements. "We don't have much time," Zixara urged, her scaled fingers dancing over a nearby console. "I can reconfigure the mothership's dark matter core to emit a disruptive pulse. It will disable the Krelthak's fleet without causing permanent damage to your bodies." Asha's skin flickered with a pattern of doubt and hope. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Zixara's reptilian eyes blinked rapidly. "Not all Krelthaks support this war. Some of us recognize the folly of our leaders' actions. Now, quickly, we must act before—" Her words were cut short as the bridge doors burst open, revealing a squad of heavily armed Krelthax warriors. In that instant, Paul's enhanced reflexes took over. He dove for cover, pulling Asha with him as energy blasts scorched the air where they had stood moments before. Zixara worked frantically at the console while Paul and Asha provided covering fire. The air crackled with energy discharges and the acrid smell of ozone. Paul's mind processed the battlefield at an astonishing rate, allowing him to anticipate enemy movements and react with uncanny precision. Beside him, Asha's bioluminescence pulsed in rapid, complex patterns. Each flash seemed to disorient the Krelthax warriors, giving their small team a crucial advantage in the chaotic firefight. "It's done!" Zixara shouted over the din of battle. "Initiating the pulse now!" A low hum filled the air, building rapidly to a teeth-rattling crescendo. Paul felt a strange tingling sensation throughout his body, as if every cell were vibrating in harmony with the ship's core. Asha's skin blazed with an intensity that forced him to shield his eyes. The pulse swept outward, passing through the ship's hull and into space beyond. On the bridge's view screens, Paul watched in awe as the Krelthax fleet suddenly went dark, their engines and weapons systems failing simultaneously. But the victory was short-lived. As the pulse dissipated, Paul felt a searing pain lance through his head. Beside him, Asha collapsed, her luminescence flickering erratically. The last thing Paul saw before darkness claimed him was Zixara rushing to their side, her reptilian features etched with concern. Paul awoke to the sterile environment of the flagship's medical bay, the beeping of monitors a steady rhythm in his ears. He tried to sit up but found his body unresponsive, a strange heaviness permeating every limb. "Easy there, Lieutenant," Dr. Zelos's voice came from nearby. "Your body has undergone significant stress." Paul turned his head with effort, relieved to see Asha in the adjacent bed. Her skin pulsed with a faint, steady glow, indicating she was alive but unconscious. "What happened?" Paul asked, his voice raspy. Dr. Zelos's large eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of agitation in Voxari body language. "The dark matter pulse you were exposed to has accelerated your transformation. We're still assessing the full extent of the changes." Before Paul could inquire further, Admiral Zorn entered the medical bay, his tall frame radiating authority. "Lieutenant Chen, Operative Vex," he nodded to Paul and the still unconscious Asha. "Your actions have dealt a significant blow to the Krelthax forces. However, we've detected a large contingent retreating to an unknown location." Paul's mind, despite the fog of recovery, began to process this information at an astounding speed. Potential strategies and outcomes flashed through his consciousness, each more detailed and nuanced than he'd ever experienced before. "Sir," Paul said, pushing himself to a sitting position despite Dr. Zelos's protests, "we need to pursue them. I have some ideas on how we might—" He was interrupted by a sudden gasp from Asha. Her eyes flew open, and in an instant, her body seemed to vanish. Paul blinked in confusion, but as he focused, he could just barely make out a faint distortion in the air where Asha had been. "Fascinating," Dr. Zelos murmured, approaching Asha's bed cautiously. "It appears your bioluminescence has evolved into a form of light manipulation. You've essentially rendered yourself invisible." Asha's voice came from the empty space, tinged with a mix of awe and fear. I don't know how I did that." Admiral Zorn's expression remained stoic, but Paul detected a hint of concern in his voice. "These new abilities could prove invaluable in our fight against the Krelthax. However, we need to ensure they won't compromise your health in the long term." As if on cue, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Admiral Zorn tapped his communication device, his posture tensing as he received new information. "We've detected a massive energy surge from the Krelthax's hidden base," he announced grimly. "Intelligence suggests they're preparing to activate a weapon of unprecedented power." Paul's enhanced mind immediately began calculating possibilities, strategies forming and discarding themselves in rapid succession. "Sir, a full-scale assault would be too risky. We need a more surgical approach. A small team, infiltrating their base and disabling their defenses from within." Asha shimmered back into visibility, her skin pulsing with purpose. "We're the best candidates for this mission. Our new abilities give us a unique advantage. Dr. Zalo stepped forward, his green markings flaring with agitation. Absolutely not. Your physiologies are highly unstable. Further exposure to combat conditions could have catastrophic consequences. A tense debate ensued, with Paul and Asha insisting on their participation while the medical team argued against it. Finally, a compromise was reached, an intensive treatment to temporarily stabilize their condition, allowing them to carry out the mission. The treatment involved a series of injections and energy field exposures that required Paul and Asha to remain in close physical contact for several hours. As they lay side by side, their bodies bathed in a soft blue glow, Paul felt their emotional connection deepening even further. Just as the treatment neared completion, urgent news arrived. The energy readings from the Krelthax base had spiked dramatically. There was no more time to wait. With their bodies still tingling from the stabilization procedure, Paul and Asha boarded a specially modified stealth ship. As they strapped themselves in, Paul's mind raced with calculations and strategies, while Asha's skin pulsed with nervous energy, causing her form to flicker in and out of visibility. The ship lifted off, carrying them towards a confrontation that would determine the fate of not just their mission, but potentially the entire war. As they broke through the flagship's atmospheric shield and into the cold vacuum of space, Paul and Asha exchanged a look of perseverance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Together, their hands clasped tightly, they braced themselves as the ship entered the planet's atmosphere. The descent was rough, buffeted by fierce winds and corrosive gases. Paul's enhanced mind worked overtime, calculating trajectories and making split-second adjustments to their course. Asha's skin flickered rapidly, her bioluminescence reacting to the stress of re-entry. With a bone-jarring thud, the stealth ship touched down on the hostile surface of the Krelthax planet. For a moment, everything was still. Then slowly, Paul and Asha stirred, their bodies glowing with intense dark matter energy. Paul groaned, pushing himself up from the control panel. Every movement sent waves of discomfort through his body. Beside him, Asha's form shimmered in and out of visibility, her control over her abilities wavering. "Status check," Paul managed, his voice strained. Asha's response came as a series of rapid light pulses across her skin. "Functional, but barely." "You?" "Same," Paul replied, already analyzing their situation. "We need to move. The longer we stay here, the worse our condition will get." They helped each other to their feet, their bodies leaning against one another for support. As the ship's hatch opened, they were immediately assaulted by the harsh environment of the Krelthax world. The air was thick and acrid, filled with swirling, corrosive gases that stung their eyes and burned their lungs. The gravity pulled at them, making each step a laborious effort. Paul's mind raced, processing the data from their surroundings at an astonishing rate. "This way," he said, pointing towards a jagged line of crystalline formations in the distance. "It's our best path to avoid detection and minimize exposure to the atmosphere." Asha nodded, her skin pulsing with drive. She raised her hands, focusing intently. The air around them shimmered, and suddenly the corrosive gases seemed to part, creating a protective bubble around them. They set off across the treacherous landscape, their progress painfully slow. The terrain was a nightmarish obstacle course of toxic geysers and razor-sharp crystal formations. Paul's precognitive abilities allowed him to guide them safely, anticipating eruptions and unstable ground moments before they occurred. As they trudged onward, the dark matter energy within them fluctuated wildly. One moment Paul felt invincible, his mind processing information at impossible speeds. The next, he was nearly brought to his knees by stabbing pain that radiated through every cell of his body. Asha fared no better. Her protective light bubble flickered dangerously with each surge of dark matter energy. During one particularly violent fluctuation, she lost control entirely, leaving them exposed to the corrosive atmosphere for heart-stopping seconds before she could reestablish the barrier. After what felt like hours of grueling travel, they crested a rise and saw their objective, the Krelthax base. It was an imposing structure of sleek alien architecture, surrounded by a shimmering energy barrier that reached high into the turbulent sky. Paul's enhanced vision picked out details of the barrier's structure, his mind already formulating potential weaknesses. But as they drew closer, the reality of their situation became clear. The barrier was far more powerful than anything they had encountered before. "We can't go through it," Asha said, her voice tight with pain and exhaustion. "And we don't have time to find another way in." Paul nodded, his eyes never leaving the barrier as his mind raced through possibilities. Suddenly, an idea struck him. Dangerous, potentially lethal, but their only option. "We can use our dark matter emissions," he said, turning to Asha. "Create a temporary breach in the barrier." Asha's eyes widened as she grasped his plan. "That could kill us," she said, but there was no hesitation in her voice. "It might," Paul agreed, "but if we don't try, billions will die." They approached the barrier, their bodies glowing brighter with each step. As they neared, the energy field crackled ominously, sending arcs of power dancing across its surface. Paul and Asha joined hands, their fingers intertwining as they had so many times before. But this time, it felt different. The dark matter within them seemed to resonate, building to a crescendo. "Ready?" Paul asked, locking eyes with Asha. She nodded, her skin pulsing with a complex pattern that conveyed more than words ever could. Together, they reached out and touched the barrier. The world exploded into pain and light. Energy coursed through them, every nerve ending on fire. Paul felt his body changing, his very DNA twisting and reshaping under the onslaught of power. Through the haze of agony, he saw Asha's form shifting as well. Her bioluminescence spread, creating intricate, glowing patterns across her entire body. Just when it seemed they couldn't endure another second, the barrier flickered. A small opening appeared, barely large enough for them to pass through. With the last of their strength, Paul and Asha stumbled through the breach. They collapsed on the other side, their bodies transformed, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Alarms blared, filling the air with their piercing wail. The Krelthax knew they were here. Paul struggled to his feet, his skin now gleaming with a metallic sheen. He helped Asha up, marveling at the complex light patterns that danced across her body. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something had changed. Their mental connection had deepened, allowing them to communicate without words. Understanding passed between them in an instant. They knew what they had to do. Without a sound, they set off into the heart of the Krelthax base, their transformed bodies moving with newfound grace and power. The next phase of their mission had begun, and the fate of humanity and all alien species hung in the balance. Balance. They pressed forward, their transformed bodies moving with newfound grace and power through the labyrinthine corridors of the Krelthax base. Alarms blared incessantly as they navigated the chaos, Paul's enhanced cognitive abilities guiding them through the safest routes. Asha's skin pulsed with complex patterns, her light manipulation abilities keeping them hidden from the frantic Krelthax soldiers rushing past. As they rounded a corner, a massive explosion rocked the facility. The ceiling above them groaned ominously, and Paul's precognitive senses flared. "Down!" he shouted, tackling Asha to the ground just as a section of the ceiling collapsed. They rolled to safety, debris raining down around them. As the dust settled, Paul felt a sharp pain in his side. A jagged piece of metal had pierced his abdomen, dark blood oozing from the wound. Asha's eyes widened in horror. "Paul!" She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they stumbled forward. Paul's vision blurred, his enhanced mind struggling to process the pain signals flooding his system. They reached a large chamber filled with humming machinery. At its center stood a massive reactor, pulsing with ominous energy. Warning lights flashed across its surface, and a computerized voice echoed through the room. "Reactor critical. Meltdown imminent. Evacuate immediately." Paul's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor. Asha cradled him in her arms, her bioluminescence pulsing frantically in time with his erratic life signs. "Stay with me, Paul," she pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. Paul's eyes fluttered, his skin growing pale. Asha knew that conventional medical treatment wouldn't be enough to save him. In that moment of desperation, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Drawing upon her evolving powers, Asha focused on the dark matter energy coursing through their bodies. She synchronized her bioluminescent patterns with Paul's fading energy signature, creating a conduit between them. A gentle glow enveloped them both as Asha began to transfer her own life force into Paul. She felt her strength waning, but Paul's condition stabilized. His eyes snapped open, filled with a new intensity. As their energies merged, something extraordinary happened. Their thoughts and emotions began to flow freely between them, creating a profound sense of unity. Paul gasped as he experienced Asha's memories, her fears, her love for him. In turn, Asha felt the full force of Paul's analytical mind, his unwavering perseverance. "Asha," Paul whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "I can feel everything." Their eyes met, and in that moment, they understood each other on a level beyond words. However, this deep connection came with a price. They now shared the burden of their unstable physiology, the dark matter energy fluctuating between their bodies in unpredictable waves. The reactor's alarms grew more insistent, snapping them back to the present danger. Paul's enhanced cognitive abilities kicked into overdrive, quickly formulating an escape plan. "We need to move," he said, struggling to his feet with Asha's help. "I can guide us out, but we'll have to be quick." They made their way through the crumbling base, Paul's precognitive abilities allowing them to avoid structural collapses and pockets of lethal radiation. As they navigated a particularly treacherous corridor, they heard voices ahead, panicked, alien voices. Rounding a corner, they encountered a group of Krelthax scientists trapped behind a fallen support beam. Among them was a familiar face, Zixara, the scientist who had helped them before. "Please," Zixara called out, her multifaceted eyes wide with fear. "Help us!" Paul and Asha exchanged a glance, their shared thoughts weighing the risks. Despite the danger to their own safety, they knew they couldn't leave the scientists behind. "Stand back," Paul warned as he and Asha approached the beam. Together, they gripped the massive metal structure. Drawing upon their shared dark matter energy, they lifted with strength beyond their physical capabilities. The beam groaned, then shifted, creating an opening for the Krelthax to escape. As the scientists scrambled to safety, Zixara approached Paul and Asha. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "But why help us after all we've done?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Asha replied, her skin pulsing with conviction. Paul nodded, adding, "And your knowledge could be crucial in understanding our condition." Another explosion rocked the base, reminding them of their dire situation. Paul's enhanced senses picked up on a faint energy signature. "There's a hangar nearby," he announced. "If we hurry, we might be able to commandeer a shuttle." The group raced through the corridors, Paul and Asha taking the lead. They burst into the hangar just as another tremor shook the facility. A sleek Krelthax shuttle sat on the launch pad, its systems humming with latent energy. "Everyone aboard!" Paul shouted, rushing to the pilot's seat. As the others filed in, Asha placed her hand on the shuttle's hull. Her bioluminescence spread across the surface, creating a shimmering cloak of light. "I'll keep us hidden from the base's defenses," she explained as she joined Paul in the cockpit. Paul's hands flew across the alien controls, his precognitive abilities allowing him to anticipate the ship's responses. The engines roared to life just as the reactor's alarms reached a fever pitch. They launched, the shuttle streaking towards the atmosphere as the Krelthax base exploded behind them. The shockwave hit them with tremendous force, rocking the small craft violently. The harsh conditions of their escape, combined with the stress on their bodies, caused Paul and Asha's shared dark matter energy to spike uncontrollably. Their forms began to flicker, phasing in and out of normal space-time. "What's happening to them?" One of the Krelthax scientists cried out in alarm. Paul and Asha reached for each other instinctively, their bodies drawn together by forces beyond their understanding. As they embraced, their physical forms began to dissolve, merging into a swirling vortex of light and dark matter energy. The Krelthax watched in awe as Paul and Asha's separate consciousnesses merged into a single, unified being. In that moment of perfect union, their combined intellect interfaced with the shuttle's experimental propulsion system. A burst of dark matter energy surged through the ship's systems, creating a spontaneous wormhole directly in their path. The shuttle was violently pulled into the swirling vortex, transporting them instantaneously across vast distances of space. As they emerged on the other side, Paul and Asha's merged form separated back into two distinct bodies. They found themselves transformed once again, their physical forms now a stable blend of human and Voxari physiology, with new characteristics derived from their dark matter exposure. Disoriented, they turned their attention to the shuttle's sensors. A massive structure loomed before them, a space station unlike anything they had encountered before. "What is that?" Asha breathed, her newly stabilized bioluminescence pulsing with curiosity. Before Paul could respond, the shuttle's communications array crackled to life. An urgent distress signal cut through the static, its source unmistakable. Earth. Paul and Asha exchanged a look of grit, their shared consciousness allowing them to grasp the full implications of this development without a word spoken between them. As they prepared to respond to humanity's call for help, they knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The weight of their responsibility settled heavily upon them as they contemplated their next move. Paul's eyes narrowed, his enhanced mind racing through possibilities. "We can't just respond blindly," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "We need a plan." Asha nodded, her bioluminescent patterns shifting in agreement. "Our current capabilities might not be enough," she added, gesturing to their transformed bodies and the alien shuttle. Their shared consciousness buzzed with activity as they formulated a strategy. Suddenly, Paul's eyes widened. "The propulsion system," he breathed. "We could use it to create a controlled wormhole directly to Earth." Asha's skin pulsed with excitement. "Combined with our dark matter energy, it just might work." But both knew they couldn't face this threat alone. Paul turned to the viewport, gazing at the massive space station looming before them. "We need allies," he declared. Without hesitation, they maneuvered the shuttle towards the station's docking bay. As they approached, they were hailed by a cacophony of alien languages, each translator struggling to keep up with the diversity of life forms aboard. Paul and Asha stepped onto the station, their unique physiology drawing curious stares from the assembled crowd. They wasted no time, quickly explaining Earth's dire situation to the station's leadership council. A towering, crystalline being that served as the station's diplomatic liaison listened intently. "Your cause is just," it chimed, its voice resonating like struck glass. "But our resources are limited." "We don't need an army," Asha assured them. "Just a small elite force willing to defend those in need." Their impassioned plea resonated with many of the station's inhabitants. Within hours, a diverse group of alien mercenaries and peacekeepers had volunteered for the mission. Among them stood a Krelthax warrior, his battle-scarred carapace a testament to his experience. "I am Zixvorn," he introduced himself, mandibles clicking. "My people's actions have brought shame upon us. Allow me to help right this wrong." As they prepared to depart, Paul and Asha briefed their new allies on the plan. The shuttle's hold was cramped, filled with an assortment of alien life forms and weaponry. "Everyone ready?" Paul called out, his hands hovering over the shuttle's controls. Asha placed her palm on the propulsion system's access panel, her bioluminescence interfacing with the alien technology. "Now," she whispered. Paul and Asha's bodies began to glow intensely, dark matter energy swirling around them. The shuttle's engines roared to life, building to a crescendo as reality itself seemed to bend and twist. With a violent lurch, the shuttle was enveloped in a swirling vortex of energy. The passengers braced themselves as they hurtled through the fabric of space-time, the very atoms of their beings stretched to their limits. In a blinding flash, they emerged in Earth's orbit. The scene that greeted them was one of utter chaos. Krelthax warships swarmed like angry insects, their advanced weapons tearing through Earth's defenses with terrifying efficiency. Paul's precognitive abilities kicked into overdrive, his enhanced mind processing the battle in microseconds. "There," he pointed, highlighting a weakness in the enemy formation on the tactical display. Asha nodded, her hands already moving across the control panel. Her bioluminescence spread across the shuttle's hull, bending light around them. "We're cloaked," she announced. "They won't see us coming." Zixvorn leaned forward, his compound eyes scanning the battlefield. The flagship, he chittered. Take it out, and their command structure will crumble. The shuttle streaked through the chaos, invisible to the Krelthax sensors. As they neared the imposing flagship, Asha's light manipulation created a complex illusion, masking their approach with false sensor readings. Now, Paul shouted. Their alien allies sprang into action. Beams of energy, projectiles of unimaginable destructive power, and weapons beyond human comprehension all converged on the flagship's vital systems. The Krelthax ship shuddered under the assault, caught completely off guard. But their victory was short-lived. The flagship's automated defenses kicked in, retaliating with a barrage that rocked the small shuttle violently. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit as systems began to fail. Paul and Asha exchanged a knowing look, their shared consciousness reaching the same conclusion simultaneously. We need to end this, Asha said, her voice resolute. Now. Paul nodded, understanding the risk they were about to take. Everyone, he addressed their allies, brace yourselves. What you're about to see, it's unprecedented. In the shuttle's cargo hold, Paul and Asha stood face to face. Their bodies began to glow, dark matter energy crackling between them. As their alien allies watched in awe, the two beings began to dissolve, their physical forms merging into a swirling vortex of energy. The merged entity of Paul and Asha expanded rapidly, phasing through the shuttle's hull. In space, it continued to grow, encompassing the entire battlefield in a massive energy field. Krelthax weapons sputtered and died, their ships left powerless in the wake of this extraordinary phenomenon. The Allied forces, guided by the merged consciousness of Paul and Asha, moved swiftly to subdue the enemy. As the last Krelthax ship surrendered, the energy field began to dissipate. The merged form of Paul and Asha started to separate, but something was wrong. Their bodies flickered and wavered, threatening to disperse entirely. Zixavorn and Zixara, the Krelthax scientists they had rescued earlier, sprang into action. Using their advanced technology, they created a containment field around the unstable forms of Paul and Asha. Hold on, Zixavorn urged, his mandibles working frantically as he adjusted the field. We're not losing you now. As the battle concluded and cleanup efforts began, Paul and Asha's unconscious forms were carefully transported to a specially constructed medical facility on Earth. Their bodies, still flickering with residual dark matter energy, were placed in stasis pods designed to stabilize their unique physiology. Days turned into weeks as scientists from multiple species worked tirelessly to understand and stabilize their condition. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, Paul's eyes fluttered open. He found himself staring at a ceiling that seemed to shift and change, adapting to his enhanced vision. Turning his head, he saw Asha in the pod next to him, her eyes also beginning to open. Their gazes met, and in that instant, they felt the familiar connection of their shared consciousness. But something was different. Their bodies had changed once again, now a perfect blend of human, Voxari, and Krelthax DNA, stabilized by the dark matter energy coursing through them. As they began to sit up, marveling at their new forms, the door to their room slid open. Admiral Zorn and Admiral Chen entered, their faces a mix of relief and apprehension. "Welcome back," Admiral Zorn said, her voice thick with emotion. "We have a lot to discuss."
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.